Welcome to the Jerome McClain Show. I'm your host, Jerome McClain, and let's get into our episode.
Intelligentsia, the endem of sarcasm, the nutty professor to your whack-ass marmalade. It's T-Bone from T-Bone and Chick Brew in the morning. Now available in podcast format. Simply search for the T-Bone and Chick Brew podcast, available wherever fine podcasts are sold.
There is a special category of political spectacle reserved for moments when a man who believes himself to be a world historical figure reveals, in the course of a single rambling address, that he possesses neither the historical knowledge nor the moral seriousness that such a role would require. The press conference delivered by Donald Trump on the morning of January 4th, in which he announced that the United States had kidnapped the president of a sovereign nation and would henceforth run that country until further notice, belongs in this category. It was, to borrow a phrase from the transcript itself, both horrible and breathtaking that something like this could have been allowed to take place, though not in the way Trump intended. One hardly knows where to begin with a document so saturated in delusion, self-congratulation, and constitutional contempt. Perhaps with the moment when Trump, having just announced an act of war against a sovereign nation, paused to inform the assembled press corps that restaurants are opening in Washington, D.C., or the passage in which he congratulated himself for settling 8 1/4 wars, the quarter referring to a border dispute between Thailand and Cambodia that he claims to have resolved in about 5 hours. Or his helpful clarification that prisons are a little bit more hostile, a little bit tougher than jails, and that a mental institution isn't as tough as an insane asylum, observations delivered in the midst of explaining why he had just bombed a foreign capital. The mind of Donald Trump is a pinball machine in which the ball never stops ricocheting, and we are all trapped inside the glass. Let us begin with the constitutional niceties, which Trump dispatched with the casual contempt of a man who has never read the document in question and would not understand it if he had. The United States Congress, that body to which the founders granted the sole authority to declare war, was not consulted before American forces bombed Caracas, seized its head of state, and announced what amounts to an indefinite military occupation. When asked about this rather significant omission, Trump offered an explanation that would make any would-be autocrat nod in recognition. Congress has a tendency to leak. This would not be good. Here is the 47th President of the United States announcing in plain language that he will not comply with the Constitution because legislators talk too much. One wonders if James Madison, scribbling away at the Constitutional Convention, anticipated that the elaborate system of checks and balances he was designing might one day be circumvented on the grounds that representatives cannot keep secrets about impending invasions. The founders feared executive tyranny. They could not have anticipated executive stupidity of this particular flavor. The man who campaigned on America First and railed against foreign entanglements has now committed the nation to administering a country of 28 million people for an unspecified duration. We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition, Trump explained, the word judicious sitting in that sentence like a tuxedo on a circus elephant. When pressed on who exactly would be running Venezuela, Trump gestured vaguely at the officials behind him. It's largely going to be, for a period of time, the people that are standing right behind me. This is not a transition plan. This is what happens when a man who has never successfully managed anything more complex than a licensing agreement is handed control of a foreign nation. The Secretary of Defense, whom Trump referred to throughout the proceedings as the Secretary of War, a title abolished in 1947 but apparently resurrected because it sounds more impressive, delivered remarks that concluded with the observation that Maduro effed around and found out. This is the level of discourse we have achieved. The United States has invaded a sovereign nation, and its defense secretary is speaking in the language of internet memes. Pete Hegseth, a man whose previous qualification for high office was hosting a cable television program, stood at the podium and announced, "Welcome to 2026, as if he were introducing a monster truck rally rather than explaining an act of war that may destabilize an entire hemisphere. When pressed on whether American troops would remain on Venezuelan soil, Trump offered clarification that clarified nothing. We're not afraid of boots on the ground if we have to have We had boots on the ground last night at a very high level. What constitutes a high level of boots? Is there a metric? A boot elevation index? These are questions that will trouble future linguists attempting to parse the utterances of a man who speaks as if words are merely sounds to be arranged in whatever order feels good at the moment. The legal justification for this adventure would be comic if the consequences were not so grave. Nicolas Maduro stands indicted in the Southern District of New York for narco-terrorism and cocaine trafficking, charges filed during Trump's first term in 2020. That an indictment issued by American prosecutors should serve as grounds for invading a foreign country and seizing its leader represents an innovation in international law that will no doubt be studied with interest in Beijing, Moscow, and every other capital where strongmen contemplate the removal of inconvenient neighbors. Senator Mark Warner posed the operative question with admirable directness. Does this mean any large country can indict the ruler of a smaller adjacent country and take that person out? The answer apparently is yes, provided that country possesses sufficient military force and a president whose understanding of international law could be inscribed on a cocktail napkin with room left over for a shopping list. Trump himself seemed to grasp this logic, issuing what can only be described as a threat to every government in the Western Hemisphere. All political and military figures in Venezuela should understand what happened to Maduro can happen to them, and it will happen to them if they aren't just fair, even to their people. He then turned his attention to Colombia, whose president he accused of operating cocaine mills and factories where he makes cocaine. He has to watch his ass, Trump declared, apparently unaware that threatening to invade a second South American country in the same press conference might strike some observers as imprudent. Cuba received similar treatment. If I lived in Havana and I was in the government, I'd be concerned at least a little bit, Marco Rubio helpfully added. The message to Latin America could not be clearer. Submit to American preferences or face military action at the whim of a man who cannot maintain a coherent thought for 60 consecutive seconds. The hypocrisy on display would be staggering if we had not grown accustomed to it. This is the same administration that mere weeks ago pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, who was serving a 45-year sentence for drug trafficking, the very crime cited as justification for seizing Maduro. When a reporter raised this rather obvious contradiction, Trump explained that Hernandez had been persecuted very unfairly in a manner comparable to his own legal troubles. Let us pause to appreciate the full lunacy of this position. Trump invaded Venezuela and kidnapped its president because of drug trafficking. Trump pardoned Honduras's president who was convicted of drug trafficking because his prosecution was unfair. The distinguishing principle appears to be whether the drug trafficker in question is friendly to Donald Trump. This is not foreign policy. This is the logic of a mob boss deciding which capos get protection and which get whacked. Representative Thomas Massey, a Republican not known for his liberalism, pointed out that the 25-page indictment against Maduro contains no mention of fentanyl or stolen oil, the two primary justifications Trump offered for the invasion. The actual charges involve possession of firearms in violation of a 1934 statute. We have invaded a country and announced plans to run it because its leader allegedly violated American gun laws while residing in South America. Attorney General Pam Bondi tweeted triumphantly about arresting a head of state for weapons possession. The rule of law has become a punchline delivered by people too dim to recognize the joke. And let us be clear about the resources in question, because Trump certainly was. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. Which country? We're going to get reimbursed for everything that we spend, Trump clarified. We're going to get reimbursed for all of that. The mask did not slip, it was never on. This is a resource grab, dressed in the language of law enforcement, a colonial expedition with a press release. We built Venezuela's oil industry with American talent, drive, and skill, and the socialist regime stole it from us during those previous administrations, Trump declared, apparently operating under the impression that the nationalization of petroleum assets by sovereign governments, a practice engaged in by nations from Saudi Arabia to Norway, constitutes theft, requiring military remedy. Massive oil infrastructure was taken like we were babies and we didn't do anything about it. The self-pity is remarkable. The world's most powerful nation, reduced to infancy by the Venezuelan government's decision to control its own natural resources. The press conference meandered through topics with the focus of a housefly. Having announced an invasion, Trump pivoted to boasting about crime statistics in Washington, D.C., where he claimed there has not been a killing in 6-7 months. a claim that is, to use a technical term, complete horseshit. From there, he segued into Memphis, New Orleans, Chicago, Los Angeles, and the general ingratitude of Democratic governors who failed to appreciate his assistance. He then returned to Venezuela, detoured through a discussion of the Monroe Doctrine, and arrived at what may be the press conference's most revealing moment. The Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a real lot, Trump announced. They now call it the Donro Doctrine. No, they do not. Nobody calls it that. No scholar, no diplomat, no analyst, no human being with functioning neural pathways has ever referred to anything as the Donro Doctrine. Trump invented this on the spot, christening his own foreign policy with a portmanteau of his name, and expected the assembled press to treat this as a legitimate development in American strategic thought. This is a man who cannot resist branding, even when the brand in question is a war crime. The Monroe Doctrine, whatever its flaws, articulated a principle about keeping European powers out of the Western Hemisphere. The Donro Doctrine, such as it is, appears to assert the right of the United States to invade any country in the region whose leader displeases Donald Trump, seize that leader in the middle of the night, and administer the country as a personal fiefdom while extracting its petroleum. This is not foreign policy. This is what happens when a narcissist with nuclear weapons decides that entire nations exist for his amusement. The constitutional scholars have been appropriately alarmed. This is clearly a blatant illegal and criminal act, said Jimmy Garul of Notre Dame Law School. Claire Finkelstein of the University of Pennsylvania called the operation an act of war, conducted without the kind of self-defense justification that would normally justify bypassing Congress. Mark Nevitt of Emory Law School observed, "I see no legal basis for us to go into another country and take a leader without an extradition treaty. But these voices exist in a world where legal reasoning matters, and we no longer live in that world." Senator Tim Kaine promised to bring a war powers resolution to the floor. Senator Bernie Sanders called it a grave abuse of power. Representative Jerry Nadler described it as completely illegal and unconstitutional. None of this will matter. The Republicans who spent 8 years of the Obama administration warning about executive overreach will discover that invasions conducted by their own party are actually fine. The constitutional order will absorb another blow, and the principle that one man cannot commit the nation to war without legislative consent will recede further into the realm of quaint historical memory. "We've had only victories," Trump declared when asked about America's mixed record with regime change. "You've had no losses." This is the epistemology of a man who has declared bankruptcy 6 times and considers himself a business genius. Victory is whatever Trump says it is. Failure is whatever happened to other people. The invasion of Iraq was a disaster when it was convenient to say so. Now it is simply not discussed. The catastrophe of Libya vanished into the memory hole. Trump has only victories because Trump does not remember his defeats and does not consider the consequences that unfold after the cameras leave. Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, raised the pertinent objection. If the justification for this operation is combating drug trafficking, then why hasn't the Trump administration taken action against Mexican cartels? The answer is obvious to anyone who has studied a map. Mexico shares a 2,000-mile border with the United States and possesses a military. Venezuela is far away and weak. The Donro Doctrine applies only to countries that cannot effectively fight back. The Venezuelan people, who have suffered enough under Maduro's misrule, now face the prospect of American military administration by officials who view their country as a gas station with a flag. The democratic opposition that has struggled for years against the regime finds itself sidelined as the United States negotiates with Maduro's own vice president about how to proceed. She's essentially willing to do what we think is necessary to make Venezuela great again, Trump reported of his conversation with Delcy Rodriguez, using his campaign slogan as if it were a legitimate framework for governing a foreign nation. Trump concluded his remarks by expressing dissatisfaction with Vladimir Putin, who is killing too many people in Ukraine. The irony appears to have escaped him entirely. One man invades a sovereign nation without legal justification, seizes its leader, announces plans to administer the country indefinitely, and expresses frustration that another man is doing something similar elsewhere. The difference, in Trump's mind, is presumably that his invasion was televised and he got to watch it from Mar-a-Lago while looking very impressed at the footage. "If you would have seen what I saw last night, you would have been very impressed," Trump told reporters. "I'm not sure that you'll ever get to see it, but it was an incredible thing to see. Here is the President of the United States describing the bombing of a foreign capital and the kidnapping of its leader as entertainment content to which the public may or may not be granted access." The man watched a war like it was pay-per-view and emerged from the experience proud of himself. This is not a foreign policy. It is not even a coherent doctrine, whatever Trump may call it. It is the foreign policy of a man who confuses impunity with legitimacy, success with virtue, and violence with strength. The bombs fell, the target was seized. The oil will flow. What more in his shriveled imagination could anyone want? The answer, for those who still believe that the American experiment was about something more than the exercise of raw power, is constitutional government, congressional authorization, respect for international law, recognition that actions have consequences beyond the immediate news cycle, and an understanding that the precedents we establish will be cited by every tyrant who wishes to justify his own aggressions. But these are concerns for people who read history rather than rename its doctrines after themselves. These are concerns for people who can complete a sentence without wandering into a tangent about restaurant openings or the relative severity of mental institutions versus insane asylums. These are concerns for serious people, and serious people no longer run American foreign policy. The Donro Doctrine is now in effect. It has no principles, no limits, and no logic beyond the whims of a man who believes that sufficient military force renders questions of law and legitimacy irrelevant. It will be cited by dictators for decades as justification for their own predations. And it was announced by a president who, in the same breath, boasted about settling 8 1/4 wars and threatened to invade Colombia. God help us all. And God help the Venezuelans, who have traded one strong man for another, this one operating from a beach club in Florida, watching their subjugation on television and finding it incredible.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Of course, if you want to support the show, you can do so by going to www.patreon.com and getting a membership for as little as $3 a month. Again, that's www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show. The Jerome McClain Show is fully listener-supported, independent media that won't lead you to tribalism. Get a membership and support independent media at www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show.